It was a regular afternoon, or at least it felt like one at first. I had spent the morning running errands, catching up on a few things around the house, and planning my evening activities. I was always busy, always moving from one thing to the next, thinking I had plenty of time for everything. My life, though filled with tasks and obligations, had always seemed to go by in a blur of routines. But that afternoon, something changed. I was sitting in my living room, scrolling through my phone, when a sharp pain suddenly gripped my chest. It was unlike anything I'd ever felt before. At first I thought I might have pulled a muscle, or maybe strained something, but the pain quickly intensified, spreading across my chest, making it hard to breathe. I stood up in a panic, gripping the arm of the couch as my heart pounded in my chest, racing faster than I could control. I tried to steady myself, telling myself it was nothing to worry about, but the pain only grew worse. I stumbled to the phone, dialing 911 as I fought to stay conscious, every second feeling like it could be my last. I don't remember much after that. The pain overwhelmed me, and soon everything went black. The next thing I knew, I wasn't in my living room anymore. The world I had known seemed to fade away, replaced by something I could barely comprehend, a world I had never known, a realm that was neither here nor there. The space around me seemed to shift and twist, as though the very air had changed. I was weightless, no longer tethered to the pain, the worry or the fear of the world I had just left behind. As I drifted, my soul detached from the body I had once called home. I had no idea that the journey I was about to take would change everything. It was as if I had stepped into another reality entirely, one where time didn't matter, where my earthly identity no longer held any significance. In that moment, everything I had once thought was important, the things I had done, the things I had neglected, seemed so distant, so unimportant. Little did I know, this would be the moment that began the transformation of my life, or what was left of it. Just when I thought I could make sense of what had happened, the air around me shifted. The stillness, the weightlessness, everything I had just experienced, suddenly it was all overshadowed by something else. Something dark. A figure appeared before me. At first I wasn't sure if it was real, or if it was just a figment of my confused mind. But no, it was real. I could feel the presence of it, heavy and oppressive, like a cloud that had settled over everything. The figure, though human in shape, radiated an aura of darkness, the kind of darkness that made every instinct in me scream to run. The being stood tall, its face obscured by a shadow, yet somehow I knew it was watching me. I couldn't see its eyes, but I felt them piercing through me, seeing into every part of my soul. There was no warmth, no kindness in this figure, only a coldness that sent chills through every fiber of my being. It moved toward me, with a slow, deliberate grace, and the air thickened with fear. My heart, or what used to be my heart, seemed to beat faster, even though I wasn't sure how I could still be feeling this sense of terror. But I was deeply. My soul recoiled, resisting. No, this can't be happening, I thought. I'm not ready. It was as if the being didn't need to speak to make its presence known. I felt it deep inside, a knowing, a command. That word reverberated through my entire existence, and without truly understanding how or why, I found myself moving toward it. But the terror was overwhelming. I fought against it, trying to hold on to whatever part of myself I could. This was the angel of death, or whatever it was that had come to take me. The very essence of this being exuded finality, the end of all things. I wanted to cry out, to beg for more time, to go back. But there was no turning back now. There was only the slow, inevitable pull toward the darkness. As it reached out, I felt its presence engulf me, and everything around me seemed to vanish. The world I knew, with its noise and life, disappeared. All I was left with was this consuming presence, and the terrifying realization that I was being taken away from the world I had once known. The next moment, I found myself crossing into something else entirely. The darkness that had enveloped me gave way to a blinding light, a light so pure and bright that it almost felt impossible to look at directly. but I couldn't look away. I was drawn to it, as though it was pulling me forward with an irresistible force. As I moved closer to the light, the air around me shifted. I was no longer floating aimlessly. There was a direction now, a purpose. I didn't know how I knew, but I knew I was moving toward the gates of judgment. Before me stood massive, towering gates, gates unlike anything I had ever seen before. They were ancient, regal, and stood as if they had been there for eternity. The gates were wrought from materials that shimmered in the light, shifting in color like they were alive. And beyond them, there was only the purest of brightness, a radiance that seemed to stretch on forever, as if the very essence of existence itself resided beyond. When I reached the gates, I stopped. I didn't know why, but I felt compelled to wait. This wasn't just some transition from life to death. It was the moment of truth, the judgment. And then the gates opened. There I stood, in the presence of the immense light, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts and emotions. But then I saw him, Jesus. It wasn't like how I had imagined him. He wasn't just a man, or even just a figure. He was the presence radiating with power, with authority, and yet there was a profound gentleness about him that made me feel both small and safe at the same time. But there was something in his eyes. Those eyes of fire, burned into me with such clarity and truth that I felt exposed in a way I could never have anticipated. Every part of me, every secret, every hidden corner of my life was laid bare before him. There was no denying it. Those eyes, though full of mercy, were also full of truth, and in his gaze I saw everything. Every moment, every action, every thought, every choice, every part of my life was known to him. And as he looked at me, I felt like there was no hiding, no way to pretend I was something I wasn't. He could see it all. The parts of me that I had buried deep within, the sins I had long forgotten, the moments I thought were hidden, everything. And then his voice. It wasn't loud, but it was commanding, a voice that carried an authority that I couldn't ignore. It resonated deep within me, a voice that felt both piercing and loving at the same time. "You stand before the King," he said, his voice echoing in the very core of my being. "You have been called to account." As he spoke, I felt my very soul tremble. There was no room for excuses, no room for lies. It wasn't about what I had thought of myself, or what others had seen in me. It was about the truth of who I had truly been. And there, in that moment, the truth was undeniable. Every action, every word, every intention of my heart was now visible in his sight. The judgment wasn't about the things I could hide from others. It was about what was already known. As I stood before Jesus, I could feel the weight of my life pressing in on me. But there was one thing that seemed to stand out among the many things being exposed. It was my giving, my offerings. It had always been a point of pride for me in my life. I had given generously at times, to various causes, to people in need, to charities, and even to the church. I thought that these offerings would stand as proof of my righteousness, my goodness, my heart of generosity. Surely they would count for something. But as the judgment unfolded, I realized with a sinking heart that my tithes weren't what they seemed. They hadn't been given for the right reasons. I had given, yes, but not to God. I had given out of a sense of obligation, out of guilt, or even to make myself feel better. I had given because I wanted recognition, or because I thought I could earn favor in some way. But in the end, those offerings were nothing more than empty gestures. They were all rooted in the wrong motives, self-indulgence disguised as generosity. I had missed the point entirely. I had focused so much on what I could gain from my giving, rather than giving out of love, out of obedience to God. My tithes had not been an act of worship. They had been a way for me to soothe my own conscience, to feel good about myself, to convince myself that I was living a righteous life. But in the end, it wasn't enough. Jesus revealed to me the truth of it all. My offerings had been rejected, not because they were small, but because they lacked sincerity. They lacked the heart of true worship. They hadn't been about honoring God, but about honoring myself. And in that moment, I understood that the judgment wasn't just about what I had done. It was about why I had done it. My misplaced priorities, my self-indulgence, my desire to be seen by others. It had all become a barrier between me and God. And in that moment, it felt like those very tithes were now testifying against me. I realized that all the material things I had prioritized, all the indulgence I had given myself, none of it could stand before the judgment of God. In his eyes, the heart behind the action mattered more than the action itself. And in that moment I saw the truth of it. It wasn't about what I had given. It was about how I had given it, and why. As I stood there, the horror of it all began to settle in. The weight of my disobedience was suffocating. I could feel the pain in my soul, the ache of all the missed opportunities, the chances I had turned away, the moments when God had called me and I had ignored him. And then it happened. Jesus, who had once offered me grace, now looked at me with those eyes of fire. I heard the words I had always feared, the words that pierced my soul deeper than anything I could have imagined. I never knew you. It wasn't that he had forgotten me, or that he had cast me aside. It was that I had never truly known him. I had never truly been in a relationship with him. I had kept my distance, living my life as if I were my own God. And now the consequences of that choice were laid bare before me. Those words were not just a statement. They were a sentence. They were the revelation of eternal separation. I understood now that there would be no second chances. The weight of regret was unbearable. I had chosen the path of disobedience, and now I was facing the result of that choice. Separation from God, eternal consequences. Just as I thought all hope was lost, something miraculous happened. I heard a voice, soft yet commanding, a voice that seemed to cut through the heavy silence. It was Jesus. "It is not the end," he said, his voice filled with compassion. "I intercede for you." In that moment, the weight of my regret seemed to lift, if only for a moment. There was a sense of mercy, a glimmer of grace, where before there had been nothing but darkness. Jesus, in his love and mercy, intervened. He spoke to the Father, and I felt a shift. A second chance, a return. "Go back," he said. "Go back to earth. Warn my people." I was given a second chance. A chance to return, not for myself, but for others. A mission was now placed on my heart. I had lived for myself in the past, but now I was being sent to warn others, to share the truth of what I had seen, to warn those who were living the same way I had lived, lukewarm, disobedient, and unaware of the eternal consequences that awaited them. Then suddenly I felt myself being drawn back. It wasn't gentle. It was as though I was being pulled away from that glorious light, with a force I couldn't resist. The very presence that had embraced me seemed to push me back, and I found myself sinking as though I were falling from an unending height. The light, that overwhelming radiance, started to fade away, like the last trace of daylight slipping beneath the horizon, and all I could feel was the weight of my own soul being pulled back to the earth. Suddenly I gasped for air, and the darkness receded. I blinked, confused and dazed. A sharp beep filled the silence, and I realized I was surrounded by the sterile beeping of machines. I could hear them all, the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor, the hum of the ventilator. Slowly my vision began to clear, and I found myself in a hospital room, tubes and wires attached to my body, my chest rising and falling with the help of a machine. It took days for me to fully comprehend what had happened. The doctors told me that I had suffered a sudden cardiac arrest, and they weren't sure how I was alive, but all I could think of was the place I had been, the horrors I had seen, and the grace I had been shown. My body was weak, fragile, and for a while I could hardly keep my eyes open, but the words and visions from my time beyond kept playing in my mind. The recovery wasn't easy. I had no strength to even sit up for days. My mind was filled with confusion and clarity all at once. Clarity about the things I had experienced, and confusion about how to even begin explaining it. But with each passing day, my body grew stronger, and my resolve deep. It was as though my physical body had been reborn, but my spirit, my soul had been forever changed. As I shared my testimony, after fully recovered, I was overwhelmed with the weight of what God had shown me. His heart was full of compassion, but also full of urgency. God was not angry. He was not cold or indifferent. He was deeply concerned for his people. The seriousness of the message I was carrying became clearer with every word I spoke. Tithes, obedience, and holiness were not just rituals or traditions. They were matters of life and death. God had been calling his people to faithfulness, to true devotion. Tithing was not just about money. It was about honoring God with what he had entrusted to us. It was about acknowledging his sovereignty over every part of our life. Our obedience to him in every area was a reflection of our relationship with him. And holiness. Holiness wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. We were called to be set apart, to live lives that reflected the nature of God himself. The time was short. There was no time to wait. The church had to return to its first love, to a life of surrender, holiness, and obedience. And that, I realized, was my mission. To sound the alarm, to share the truth of what I had seen, and to call the church to wake up. The stakes were high, and the opportunity to change was now. If you're finding this story impactful, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your thoughts and feedback mean the world to us.